The morning of May 22nd, 1943. North Atlantic Ocean, coordinates 50 degrees 40 minutes north, 35 degrees 21 minutes west. Lieutenant Commander William Chamberlain adjusted his grip on the control stick of his TBF Avenger torpedo bomber, scanning the grey expanse below through intermittent cloud cover. His aircraft had launched from USS Bogue 30 minutes earlier, one of 9 Avengers assigned to Composite Squadron 9. The radar operator's voice crackled through the headset. Contact, surface vessel. Range 18 miles, bearing 090 relative. Chamberlain pushed the stick forward. Below him, invisible beyond the horizon, a Type 7C U-boat designated U-569 ran on the surface at 15 knots, her diesel engines churning seawater into white foam as batteries depleted from a night of evasion recharged. Commander Hans Johansson stood on the conning tower bridge, watching his lookouts scan the skies. They had been at sea for 7 weeks. The rendezvous with supply submarine U-459 was scheduled for these exact coordinates. What none of them knew was that this encounter would mark the beginning of the most catastrophic reversal in submarine warfare history. Within 8 months, American escort carrier hunter-killer groups would shatter the myth of U-boat invincibility and force Admiral Dönitz to withdraw his entire submarine fleet from the Atlantic. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Battle of the Atlantic had taught both sides that submarine warfare was fundamentally about mathematics. Sink more tonnage than the enemy could build, and victory would follow. Lose submarines faster than they could be replaced, and defeat was inevitable. By spring 1943, the German Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm appeared to be winning this equation. In March alone, Wolfpacks sank 82 ships totaling 476,000 tons in Atlantic waters. The figures seemed to favour Germany. 20 new U-boats entered service each month, while losses averaged fewer than 15. Admiral Dönitz commanded over 240 submarines from his headquarters in occupied France. His Rudel tactic, the Wolfpack tactics he had developed during World War I while imprisoned in Britain, had nearly severed the lifeline between America and Europe. Convoy HX-229 and SC-122 had been savaged in the largest convoy battle of the war. Winston Churchill would later write that the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire conflict. The official British naval report concluded that the Germans never came so close to disrupting communications between the New World and the Old as in the first 20 days of March 1943. But on that May morning, as Chamberlain's Avenger closed on U-569, the tide was already turning in ways Dönitz could not yet comprehend. USS Bogue displaced 9,800 tons and carried a complement of 890 men. Her flight deck stretched 495 feet, launching 12 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 9 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. But the escort carrier's greatest weapons were technologies the Germans didn't yet understand. Centimetric wavelength radar, invisible to German detection equipment. High-frequency direction finding gear that could triangulate U-boat radio transmissions with devastating accuracy. And carried in the bomb bays of her Avengers, a secret weapon designated Mark 24 mine to disguise its true nature. The Fido acoustic homing torpedo. The hunter-killer concept represented a fundamental shift in anti-submarine warfare. Traditional convoy escorts could only react to attacks, forced to choose between pursuing submarines and protecting merchant ships. Hunter-killer groups had no such constraints. Their sole mission was to find and destroy U-boats wherever they operated. Bogue had departed Norfolk, Virginia in February 1943 as the nucleus of the first American hunter-killer group. For 3 months she had crossed the North Atlantic protecting convoys, sinking no submarines. Her crew had trained endlessly. Her pilots had flown patrol after patrol through Atlantic weather that could flip an aircraft inverted with a single gust. On April 22nd, Bogue departed on her 4th Atlantic crossing. This time, something was different. Ultra-intelligence, the Allied code-breaking operation centred at Bletchley Park in England, had decoded German naval transmissions, revealing the positions of multiple U-boat refueling rendezvous points Milk Cow submarines U-459 and U-487 were scheduled to resupply Wolfpacks operating along the convoy routes. The operations officer aboard Bogue reached for the secure telephone. One escort carrier supported by 4 destroyer escorts would hunt the hunters. Lieutenant Commander Howard Avery, who would later command Composite Squadron 9, understood that U-boats were most vulnerable during 3 critical periods: surfacing to charge batteries, meeting supply submarines for fuel and torpedoes, and transmitting radio reports to Dönitz's headquarters in Lorient, France. German submarine doctrine required frequent radio communication, position reports every 24 hours, contact reports immediately upon sighting convoys, weather observations twice daily, damage assessments after attacks. Each transmission was a potential death sentence, revealing the submarine's location to Allied direction, finding stations scattered across the Atlantic. Aboard U-569, Commander Johansen reviewed his patrol orders. 7 weeks at sea had depleted fuel reserves to critical levels. Radio instructions directed him to rendezvous with Milk Cow U-459 at these exact coordinates. The Type 7C submarine displaced 769 tons and 871 tons submerged. She carried 14 torpedoes and a crew of 44 men. Her 4 bow tubes and single stern tube had accounted for 1 merchant ship sunk and another damaged during her career, a modest tally that reflected the increasingly dangerous Atlantic environment. But the submarine's greatest vulnerability remained unchanged since the Great War. Diesel engines required air for combustion. Electric batteries needed hours of surface charging. A Type 7C could remain submerged for 18 hours at economical speed, but high-speed evasion drained batteries in less than an hour. The American hunter-killer groups exploited these weaknesses with scientific precision. Search patterns calculated to maximize radar coverage, aircraft patrol schedules timed to catch surfaced submarines, attack protocols designed to maintain continuous pressure until batteries were exhausted. At 14:20 hours, Lieutenant Chamberlain detected the surfaced submarine on radar, range 18 miles. He pushed the control stick forward and began his attack run. U-569 was running on the surface, her diesels charging depleted batteries after a night spent evading aircraft. The bridge watch spotted the approaching aircraft at 8 miles away. Alarm bells rang throughout the boat as Johansen ordered an emergency dive. Crash dive procedures for a Type 7C required 35 seconds from alarm to periscope depth. Ballast tank vents opened. Diesel engines stopped. Electric motors engaged. The submarine's bow angled sharply downward as tons of seawater flooded the tanks. Lieutenant Chamberlain's depth charge pattern caught U-569 at shallow depth. 4 Mark 17 depth charges set for shallow detonation. The explosions damaged the submarine severely, forcing her back to the surface. A second Avenger, piloted by Howard Roberts, was already in position when the submarine reappeared. Roberts attacked immediately but ceased fire when he observed white flags appearing on the submarine's periscope. The crew was surrendering. The Canadian destroyer HMCS Street, Laurent was vectored to the scene, but as she approached, Johansen ordered his crew to scuttle the boat and abandon ship. 25 of the 44 crew members survived to be pulled from the Atlantic. 19 men went down with their boat. The capture of survivors from U-569 provided Allied intelligence with valuable insights. During interrogation, German submariners expressed shock at the accuracy of American aircraft attacks. "They knew exactly where we were," one survivor stated. "It was as if they could see through the ocean itself." But ultra-intelligence had revealed more than individual submarine positions. Cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park had decoded the entire German naval grid system, identifying patrol areas, Wolfpack assembly points, and supply rendezvous coordinates. Every U-boat at sea was potentially compromised. On June 5, 1943, USS Bogue's aircraft located U-217 charging batteries on the surface 450 miles west of the Azores. Captain Lieutenant Kurt Reichenbach Klinker had commanded the submarine through 3 patrols, sinking 3 ships totaling 10,651 tons. Aircraft from Bogue attacked at dawn, catching U-217 inches, the vulnerable moments before diving. The first Avenger's depth charges damaged the submarine's diving mechanism. Unable to submerge, Reichenbach-Klinker ordered his gun crews to engage the attacking aircraft, while damage control teams worked desperately to repair the diving planes. The surface engagement lasted 18 minutes. U-217's 88mm deck gun and 20mm anti-aircraft weapons fired over 300 rounds. One Wildcat sustained minor damage from shell fragments, but the submarine was fighting a losing battle against aircraft specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare. An Avenger from Bogue Squadron delivered the killing blow with depth charges that bracketed the submarine perfectly. The explosions destroyed U-217's pressure hull in multiple locations. Water poured through ruptured seams. The submarine sank stern first in less than 3 minutes. There were no survivors from the crew of 49. 5 days later, Bogue's aircraft located U-118 on the surface east of the Azores. The submarine had been damaged in a previous attack and was attempting to reach the safety of occupied France for repairs. Her commander, Werner Zeigen, ordered maximum surface speed as lookouts spotted multiple aircraft approaching from different bearings. U-118 fought desperately, her anti-aircraft crews firing continuously as Avengers attacked in coordinated waves. But the outcome was never in doubt. Aircraft from Bogue bombed and strafed the submarine until she could no longer maintain way. 16 survivors were pulled from the water by the destroyer Escort, USS Osmond Ingram. In less than 3 weeks, Bogue had sunk 3 submarines and damaged several others. The hunter-killer concept was proving devastatingly effective, but these successes represented only the leading edge of a transformation that would redefine naval warfare. The Wolfpack tactics developed by Admiral Dönitz had achieved remarkable success between 1940 and 1942. Multiple U-boats coordinated through radio communications would converge on convoys, attacking simultaneously from different bearings to overwhelm defensive escorts. Surface attacks conducted at night exploited the U-boats' superior surface speed and made them invisible to sonar. During what U-boat crews called the Second Happy Time, operations off the American coast from January to August 1942, German submarines sank 609 ships totaling over 3 million tons. Corvette Captain Reinhard Hardigan, commanding U-123 off New York, wrote in his war diary that it was a pity there were not 10 U-boats instead of 1. Hunting is magnificent. The Americans are so careless they have learned nothing from 2 years of war. By the end of 1942, Dönitz had sufficient Type 7 U-boats to fully implement his Wolfpack strategy. Allied merchant ship losses reached catastrophic levels. In November alone, 119 ships were sunk by submarines, 83 of them totaling 508,000 tons in the Atlantic. The mathematics appeared inexorable. Dönitz calculated that sinking 700,000 tons monthly would achieve strategic victory. In several months of late 1942 and early 1943, his submarines approached or exceeded this figure. But the calculation contained fatal flaws that Dönitz did not yet comprehend. American shipyards were producing vessels at rates that defied German intelligence estimates. Between 1941 and 1945, 18 American shipyards would build 2,710 Liberty ships, an average of 3 ships every 2 days. What Dönitz didn't yet fully grasp was that this represented merely one component of an industrial tsunami that would produce over 5,000 merchant vessels and completely reverse the Battle of the Atlantic. More critically, the Allies were developing countermeasures that would transform the submarine from predator to prey. Escort carriers like USS Bogue represented the most visible element of this transformation, but they were effective only because of convergent technological advances that created a comprehensive anti-submarine system. Centimetric wavelength radar allowed aircraft to detect surfaced submarines at night and in poor visibility. The Germans possessed no equivalent technology, and their existing radar warning receivers could not detect these new frequencies. U-boat commanders reported aircraft appearing from nowhere, achieving complete surprise before defensive measures could be implemented. High-frequency, direction finding, called huff-duff by Allied sailors, allowed shore stations and equipped ships to triangulate the source of U-boat radio transmissions. Given the German requirement for frequent communication with headquarters, nearly every submarine broadcast its position multiple times daily. The Mark 24 Fido acoustic homing torpedo, designated a mine for security purposes, pursued submarines underwater. Dropped by aircraft, it activated upon water entry and followed the distinctive sound signature of submarine propellers and diesel engines. U-boat commanders reported torpedoes that followed evasive maneuvers, something previously impossible with conventional depth charges. Improved sonar systems gave surface escorts unprecedented detection capabilities. New weapons like the Hedgehog, which threw multiple contact-fused projectiles ahead of the attacking ship, allowed escorts to maintain sonar contact while attacking. Traditional depth charges required the escort to pass over the submarine's position, losing sonar contact at the critical moment. Perhaps most importantly, breaking the German naval Enigma code gave Allied commanders unprecedented insight into U-boat positions and intentions. When the Admiralty submarine tracking room in London decoded transmission schedules for refueling rendezvous, hunter-killer groups could position themselves with precision. These technologies did not function in isolation. Their power emerged from systematic integration. A shore station intercepts a U-boat transmission and triangulates its position. This information is transmitted to a hunter-killer group operating in that area. The escort carrier launches aircraft equipped with centimetric radar. They locate the submarine on the surface at night. Mark 24 acoustic torpedoes are dropped. The U-boat attempts to dive, but the homing torpedo follows it down, detonating against the pressure hull. Each element of this system had been developed separately, but by May 1943, they had been integrated into a coordinated whole that transformed the Atlantic from a vast hiding place into a transparent battlefield. Admiral Dönitz understood that something had fundamentally changed, but the speed and completeness of the transformation exceeded anything he had anticipated. March 1943 had marked the peak of U-boat effectiveness. The battles around convoy HX-229 and SC-122 resulted in 22 merchant ships sunk, 146,000 tons sent to the bottom. Dönitz personally announced the success in a special communiqué, declaring it proof that the U-boat remained the decisive weapon in Germany's arsenal. But April brought troubling signs. 40 U-boats attacked multiple convoys, yet only 39 merchant ships totaling 235,000 tons were sunk in the Atlantic. More ominously, 15 U-boats were destroyed. The loss ratio had shifted dramatically. The operational reports arriving at U-boat headquarters in Lorient painted an increasingly grim picture. Commanders reported aircraft attacks at night when submarines had previously operated with impunity. Radio communications were being intercepted with impossible accuracy. Acoustic torpedoes pursued submarines through evasive maneuvers. Surface escorts maintained contact through conditions that should have broken sonar tracking. On May 1, 1943, U-boat strength reached its peak. 240 operational submarines, 118 at sea. It represented the largest submarine force ever deployed by any nation. Within 24 days, it would be shattered beyond recovery. The battle for convoy ONS-5 opened the month. 30 U-boats of Group Fink attempted to overwhelm 16 escort vessels protecting 43 merchant ships. The convoy was scattered by a violent storm. Individual merchantmen wallowed alone in mountainous seas. Perfect conditions for submarine attack. Yet the U-boats achieved only limited success. 13 merchant ships were sunk, a significant toll, but 6 U-boats were destroyed by escorts and aircraft. The exchange ratio that had favored submarines throughout the war had suddenly reversed. 2 weeks later, the battle around convoy SC-130 demonstrated the new reality with brutal clarity. 5 U-boats attacked. Not a single merchant ship was lost. 5 U-boats were sunk, including U-954 commanded by Oberleutnant Peter Dönitz, the Admiral's 21-year-old son. By May 24, 43 U-boats had been destroyed, 25% of operational strength, 18 in convoy battles, 14 by air patrols, 6 in the Bay of Biscay. 4 to accidents, the remainder to causes that could not be determined. Admiral Dönitz, shocked at the defeat suffered by his submarine arm, ordered a temporary halt to operations. Most U-boats were withdrawn from the North Atlantic. At U-boat headquarters in Lorient, staff officers spoke quietly of Black May. It was a defeat from which the German submarine force would never recover. The withdrawal represented an admission that Dönitz could barely articulate. The technological and tactical superiority his submarines had enjoyed for 3 years had evaporated in weeks. The hunters had become the hunted. USS Bogue continued operations throughout this catastrophic month for German submarines. On July 23, her aircraft sank U-527, while the submarine was rendezvousing with U-648 for fuel transfer. On November 29, aircraft from Bogue sank U-86 east of the Azores. The next day, depth charges and rockets damaged U-238 so severely that 2 crew members were killed and 5 wounded. The submarine limped back to Brest for repairs that took over a month. Bogue's 8th patrol in November and December 1943 proved her most productive. On November 29, aircraft sank U-86. On December 13, coordinated attacks by Bogue's aircraft and destroyer escorts sank U-172 after an 18-hour pursuit that saw the submarine dive to 700 feet attempting to escape. On December 20th, aircraft sank U-850, 3 submarines destroyed in 3 weeks. The mathematics had reversed completely. Other escort carriers joined the hunter-killer campaign with similar effectiveness. USS Card, under Captain Arnold Isbell, sank 9 German U-boats between July and November 1943. Her aircraft and escorts achieved such consistent success that the entire task group was awarded a Presidential Unit Citation, the first hunter-killer group to be so recognized. USS Corps' hunter-killer group accounted for multiple U-boats throughout late 1943 and early 1944. USS Croatan, USS Block Island, USS Guadalcanal, and others formed additional groups that systematically hunted submarines across the Atlantic. The only American escort carrier lost in Atlantic operations was USS Block Island, torpedoed by U-549 inches, May 1944. But even this represented a Pyrrhic victory for Germany. The destroyer escorts immediately counterattacked and sank U-549, killing her entire crew. By contrast, 7 escort carrier hunter-killer groups and their destroyer escorts sank 54 U-boats in Atlantic operations. 31 were destroyed by carrier aircraft, 23 by escort vessels. British and Canadian escort carrier groups accounted for additional submarines, bringing total U-boat losses to hunter-killer operations to over 90. The exchange ratio that had once favored U-boats by 10-1 had reversed to favor the Americans by 20-1. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The psychological impact on U-boat crews exceeded even the material losses. Submarine service, once considered an elite assignment, became synonymous with death. Training commanders struggled to maintain morale among crews who understood they faced overwhelming odds. Korvettenkapitän Peter Kretschmer, one of only a handful of U-boat aces to survive the war, would later write that they had no answer to the hunter-killer groups. They possessed every advantage: radar we couldn't detect, weapons we couldn't evade, intelligence that revealed our every move, and most importantly, the ability to be everywhere at once. We went from predators to prey in what seemed like overnight. The statistics support this assessment. In May 1943, 43 U-boats were destroyed. In the following months through the end of the year, losses continued at rates German shipyards could not match. July saw 37 submarines lost. August saw 25. September saw 23. October saw 26. Meanwhile, American and British shipyards continued producing merchant vessels at accelerating rates. Liberty ship construction reached its peak efficiency. Some yards completed vessels in less than 3 weeks from keel laying to launch. The SS Robert E. Peary was built in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes as a demonstration of American industrial capacity. The tonnage war that Dönitz had calculated would bring Britain to its knees had reversed completely. Allied merchant ship production exceeded submarine sinkings by factors of 3-1, then 5-1, then 10-1. German submarine commanders attempting to interdict this flood of shipping found themselves targeted by systematic hunter-killer operations that gave them no respite. U-boat veterans would later describe the transformation in stark terms. One commander recalled that until May 1943, they felt like wolves hunting sheep. After May, they felt like sheep being hunted by wolves. The technological innovations developed by hunter-killer groups influenced naval warfare for decades beyond World War II. The integration of air and surface assets became standard doctrine in modern navies. The use of intelligence to direct operations was refined during the Cold War anti-submarine campaigns. The application of operational research to optimize tactics became fundamental to military planning across all services. The Mark 24 Fido acoustic torpedo evolved into increasingly sophisticated homing weapons. The destroyer Escort design served as the template for Cold War frigates. The hunter-killer concept became the foundation for carrier-based anti-submarine warfare groups that operated throughout the nuclear submarine era. Perhaps most significantly, the success of escort carrier hunter-killer groups demonstrated that industrial capacity and scientific advancement would determine future conflicts. The age of individual heroism had yielded to the era of systematic warfare. German U-boat commanders who survived the war carried this knowledge with them for decades. They had entered service believing they were joining an elite force that would determine the conflict's outcome. They discovered instead that they faced an enemy who had transformed warfare itself, replacing the art of combat with the science of destruction. Their shock at this transformation echoed through the ranks of the U-boat force, and ultimately through naval history. Admiral Dönitz attempted to restore U-boat effectiveness through technological improvements. Schnorkel breathing apparatus allowed submarines to run diesel engines while remaining submerged at periscope depth. Acoustic torpedoes targeted escort vessels' propellers. Type 21 submarines, with revolutionary design that prioritized underwater performance over surface speed, were rushed into development. But these innovations came too late and in insufficient numbers. The Type 21 submarine, which could have changed the balance of underwater warfare, did not become operational until the war's final weeks. Schnorkel-equipped boats achieved modest successes but remained vulnerable to aircraft detection and attack. The fundamental problem remained unsolved. American hunter-killer groups had created a system that was self-reinforcing and continuously improving. Each U-boat sunk provided intelligence through captured documents and interrogated survivors. This intelligence refined tactics and improved equipment. Better equipment led to more sinkings. More sinkings provided more intelligence. The U-boat force found itself caught in a downward spiral from which no technological innovation could extract it. By late 1944, U-boat operations had been reduced to desperation measures. Submarines, equipped with snorkels, attempted to operate in coastal waters around Britain. Others deployed to distant theatres like the Indian Ocean and Caribbean, where Allied defences were theoretically weaker. Still others were modified to carry Kaiten manned suicide torpedoes in cooperation with Japan. None of these measures restored the submarine's effectiveness as a strategic weapon. In May 1945, as Germany surrendered, the remaining U-boats received Dönitz's final order: surface, fly black flags, and proceed to Allied ports. Of the 49 boats that complied, many were commanded by officers younger than 25. Their crews consisted of teenagers who had never seen combat. They surrendered to hunter-killer groups that had been preparing to destroy them with the same methodical efficiency that had characterized the entire campaign. The last operational U-boat patrol ended on May 7, 1945, when U-320 was sunk by British escorts. Her commander, Oberleutnant zur See Helmut Emmerich, was 24 years old. He and his entire crew of 36 men represented the final casualties of a force that had once threatened to change the war's outcome. The human cost was staggering beyond comprehension. Of 40,000 German submariners who went to war, 30,000 never returned. a casualty rate of 75%. 784 of 1,162 commissioned U-boats were destroyed. The loss rate for boats on their first patrol exceeded 50% by war's end. Entire graduating classes from U-boat school were wiped out within months of completing training. American losses, by contrast, were minimal. The hunter-killer groups lost only one escort carrier in the Atlantic, USS Block Island. Fewer than 10 destroyer escorts were lost throughout the entire campaign. The exchange ratio that had once favored U-boats by 10-1 had reversed to favor the Americans by 20-1 or better. Post-war analysis revealed the elegant efficiency of hunter-killer operations. Search patterns had been optimized using probability theory. Weapon delivery was calculated to maximize kill probability while minimizing ammunition expenditure. Communication intercepts were correlated with operational patterns to predict U-boat behavior. Every element had been refined through rigorous analysis and practical application. The greatest shock for German U-boat commanders was not the loss of tactical superiority, but the speed and completeness of its occurrence. In March 1943, Wolfpacks had nearly severed Atlantic supply lines. By November 1943, U-boats were being hunted to extinction, their bases under constant surveillance, their communications compromised, their every movement predicted and countered. This reversal occurred not through any single technological breakthrough, but through the systematic integration of multiple advantages. Radar that could detect submarines day or night, aircraft that could patrol for hours, hundreds of miles from base, weapons that could find targets regardless of evasion attempts, intelligence that revealed enemy intentions before they were executed, and industrial capacity that could replace losses faster than the enemy could inflict them. The hunter-killer groups had written the first chapter of modern naval warfare, where victory was determined not by individual courage or skill, but by systematic superiority across multiple domains. They had transformed the Atlantic from a vast hiding place into a transparent battlefield where every movement was observed, every transmission intercepted, and every mistake punished with destruction. Admiral Dönitz would spend 10 years in Spandau prison as a war criminal, contemplating the destruction of the force he had built and led. His post-war memoirs contained a telling passage: "I had believed that courage and determination could overcome material disadvantages. The American hunter-killer groups taught me that in modern war, technology and industrial capacity are decisive. We were not defeated by better sailors, but by better systems." The legacy of the hunter-killer groups extends beyond their wartime achievements. They demonstrated that future naval warfare would be determined by the integration of air and surface forces, the fusion of intelligence with operations, and the application of scientific methodology to tactical problems. The nuclear submarines of the Cold War, equipped with sophisticated sensors and weapons, were direct descendants of the concepts proven by escort carriers and destroyer escorts in the Atlantic. Modern anti-submarine warfare doctrine traces its lineage directly to the tactics developed by USS Bogue, USS Card, USS Core, and their sister ships. In the cold depths of the Atlantic Ocean, over 500 German submarines rest on the ocean floor, their steel hulls slowly dissolving into the abyss. They are monuments to the devastating effectiveness of American hunter-killer groups, who transformed submarine hunting from a desperate defensive measure into an offensive campaign of systematic destruction. The young men who commanded these doomed vessels had entered service, believing they were joining an elite force that would determine the war's outcome. They discovered instead that they were facing an enemy who had transformed warfare itself, replacing the art of combat with the science of destruction. Their shock at this transformation echoed through the ranks of the U-boat force and ultimately through naval history itself. The German U-boat force had entered 1943 as masters of the Atlantic, their Wolfpacks savaging convoys with near impunity. They ended it as hunted fugitives, their bases bombed, their supply lines severed, their experienced crews dead, and their remaining boats cowering in ports or fleeing from relentless pursuit. The shock of this reversal would resonate through naval history as the moment when technology, intelligence, and industrial capacity forever changed the nature of warfare at sea. The American hunter-killer groups of 1943 to 45 had shocked German U-boat commanders, not through superior seamanship or courage, qualities both sides possessed in abundance, but through the systematic application of overwhelming technological and industrial superiority that transformed the ocean from a sanctuary into a killing field, where precision, not valor, determined survival. The final statistics were irrefutable. The hunter-killer groups and their allied counterparts had sunk 784 German U-boats. They had killed 30,000 German submariners while losing fewer than 5,000 of their own men. They had reduced the U-boat threat from near victory to complete defeat in less than 2 years. It was not merely a military victory, but a demonstration that the nature of warfare itself had fundamentally changed. The era of the lone wolf submarine operating independently through stealth and cunning had ended. The future belonged to integrated naval forces employing sophisticated sensors, weapons, and intelligence in coordinated operations. The hunter-killer groups had not just won the Battle of the Atlantic, they had revolutionized naval warfare and shocked their sepours, enemies with the completeness of their transformation from hunted to hunter. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The transformation of the Atlantic battlefield did not occur through a single decisive moment, but through accumulated weight of systematic advantages that compounded over months. Each technological innovation multiplied the effectiveness of others. Each tactical refinement built upon lessons learned from previous encounters. Each intelligence breakthrough revealed vulnerabilities that could be exploited with increasing precision. Consider the evolution of a single hunter-killer operation. In February 1943, USS Bogue made her first Atlantic crossing as an escort carrier. Her aircraft flew patrol patterns based on theoretical calculations and limited operational experience. When they detected submarines, attacks were often unsuccessful due to insufficient coordination between air and surface units. By July 1943, the same carrier, operating with the same basic equipment, had transformed into a precision instrument of submarine destruction. Radar operators could distinguish submarine contacts from sea returns with practiced expertise. Pilots knew exactly how to position their aircraft for optimal depth charge delivery. Destroyer escort commanders understood precisely when to commence surface attacks and when to hold position for aircraft strikes. This transformation resulted not from replacement of personnel or equipment, but from systematic refinement of procedures through operational analysis. Every attack was debriefed extensively. Every failure was analyzed to determine root causes. Every success was documented to identify replicable factors. The Operational Research Section of the Royal Navy's Western Approaches Command pioneered many of these analytical techniques. Scientists and mathematicians worked alongside naval officers to optimize every aspect of anti-submarine operations. They calculated ideal search patterns based on probability distributions of submarine positions. They determined optimal spacing for depth charge patterns based on pressure wave propagation through water. They analyzed communication intercepts to identify patterns in U-boat behavior that could predict future positions. Captain Gilbert Roberts of the Royal Navy established the Western Approaches Tactical Unit, where escort commanders could practice anti-submarine tactics using detailed simulations. The facility used scale models, mathematical calculations, and role-playing exercises to test tactical innovations before implementing them operationally. Successful tactics were documented and disseminated throughout Allied naval forces. American forces adopted and expanded these methods. The Anti-Submarine Warfare Operations Research Group, established in 1942, applied scientific methodology to every aspect of submarine hunting. Their analyses influenced everything from aircraft patrol altitudes to the optimal number of escorts per convoy. This systematic approach to warfare represented something fundamentally new. Previous conflicts had relied primarily on experience, intuition, and tradition to guide tactical decisions. The Battle of the Atlantic marked the first large-scale application of scientific analysis to military operations. The results spoke for themselves. USS Card's November 1943 patrol demonstrated the matured hunter-killer concept operating at peak efficiency. The carrier's task group had been at sea for 3 weeks, hunting submarines across a broad area of the central Atlantic based on ultra-intelligence, indicating U-boat concentrations. On November 1st, aircraft from CARD detected U-405 on the surface charging batteries. The submarine crash-dived successfully, evading the initial attack, but this represented merely the opening move in a carefully choreographed operation. CARD's destroyer escorts immediately converged on the dive position, establishing sonar contact and commencing depth charge attacks. The submarine went deep, attempting to slip away beneath a thermal layer that might break sonar contact. But the escorts had been training for exactly this scenario. They maintained contact through careful coordination, one ship holding sonar while others maneuvered for attack positions. For 6 hours, the pursuit continued. U-405's commander, Korvettenkapitän Rolf Heinrich Hauptmann, executed every evasion technique in the German tactical manual. He varied in depth and speed. He released bold decoys that created false sonar echoes. He turned sharply to throw off pursuit. None of it mattered. The destroyer USS Bogue finally forced the submarine to surface through sheer persistence. U-405 broke through the waves with batteries nearly exhausted and compressed air reserves depleted. What followed was one of the most unusual engagements of the entire Atlantic campaign. Bogue attempted to ram the submarine but misjudged the approach, her bow riding up onto U-405's foredeck. The two vessels locked together, grinding against each other in heavy seas. Sailors from both ships exchanged small arms fire at ranges of mere feet. Bogue's crew threw hand grenades and empty shell casings at German sailors on the conning tower. U-405's deck gun crew attempted to depress their weapon far enough to engage Bogue's hull, but found it impossible at such close range. The surreal melee lasted several minutes before a large wave separated the vessels. U-405 attempted to dive, but her damaged hull could not withstand submergence. She resurfaced immediately, taking on water through multiple breaches. Hauptmann ordered the abandoned ship. Bogue's crew pulled survivors from the water as the submarine sank stern first. This engagement, dramatic as it was, represented an anomaly. Most encounters between hunter-killer groups and U-boats followed, far more systematic patterns. Aircraft detected submarines on the surface. Homing torpedoes or depth charges forced them to dive. Surface escorts pursued underwater contacts until the submarine was destroyed or forced to surface in surrender. The efficiency of this system increased throughout late 1943 and into 1944. USS Guadalcanal's task group achieved particular distinction in June 1944 with the capture of U-505, the only German submarine boarded and captured on the high seas during the war. Captain Daniel Gallery, commanding Guadalcanal, had developed specific procedures for attempting submarine capture rather than destruction. When his aircraft detected U-505 on the surface and depth charges forced her to the surface damaged, Gallery ordered his destroyer escorts to hold fire while a boarding party was prepared. The German crew, believing their submarine was sinking and faced with imminent destruction, abandoned ship before completing scuttling procedures. A boarding party from USS Pillsbury, led by Lieutenant Albert David, reached the submarine while she was still afloat. They descended into the dark interior, not knowing if scuttling charges would detonate at any moment, and secured critical intelligence materials, including codebooks and an Enigma machine. The capture of U-505 provided Allied intelligence with invaluable insights into German naval procedures and equipment. More importantly, it demonstrated the confidence and systematic approach that characterized American hunter-killer operations by mid-1944. Gallery's task group had not merely hunted submarines, they had captured one intact for analysis. German submarine commanders attempting to operate in this environment faced impossible odds. Consider the operational cycle of a typical U-boat patrol in late 1943. The submarine departed its base in occupied France, immediately vulnerable to air attack while transiting the Bay of Biscay. Allied aircraft, equipped with ley lights, conduct night patrols, specifically targeting submarines in this choke point. To reach open Atlantic waters, the U-boat must either risk surface transit at high speed or spend days crawling submerged on battery power. Once in the operational area, the submarine must surface periodically to charge batteries and transmit required radio reports. Each radio transmission risks detection by direction-finding stations. Each surfacing risks detection by patrolling aircraft. The installation of radar warning receivers provides some protection, but Allied centimetric radar operates on frequencies these devices cannot detect. If the submarine locates a convoy, attempting to attack means exposing its position. Convoy escorts are now numerous, well-trained, and equipped with sophisticated detection equipment. A single attack often brings multiple escorts converging on the submarine's position. Even a successful torpedo strike brings immediate and overwhelming counterattack. If detected, the submarine faces systematic prosecution that can last for hours or days. Surface escorts maintain sonar contact through evasive maneuvers, air-dropped acoustic torpedoes home on engine noise regardless of depth or course changes. Hedgehog salvos bracket the submarine with multiple projectiles, requiring only a single hit to breach the pressure hull. Battery depletion eventually forces the submarine to surface, where aircraft or surface ships await. The choice becomes surrender or destruction. Most crews chose the former when given the opportunity. Those who fought to the end rarely left survivors. This operational reality explains the catastrophic casualty rates suffered by U-boat crews. They were not defeated through lack of courage or skill. They were defeated by systematic application of overwhelming advantages that made submarine operations unsustainable. The psychological toll on U-boat crews manifested in multiple ways. Training, commanders reported increasing difficulty maintaining morale among new recruits who understood the statistics. Letters from the front, carefully censored to prevent compromising information from reaching Allied hands, nevertheless conveyed growing despair. One U-boat commander wrote to his wife in early 1944 that he no longer believed they could win but hoped only to survive until the war's end. Another described feeling hunted constantly, unable to rest even when submerged, knowing that at any moment an aircraft might appear overhead or a destroyer might achieve sonar contact. The German Naval High Command attempted to counter declining morale through various means. Propaganda emphasized technological developments that would restore submarine superiority. The Type 21 submarine, with its revolutionary design prioritizing underwater performance, was presented as a war-winning weapon that would reverse Allied advantages. But experienced commanders recognized that individual technological improvements could not overcome systematic disadvantages. The fundamental problem was not any single Allied capability, but the integrated system that made the Atlantic transparent to Allied forces while keeping it opaque to German submarines. Admiral Dönitz continued to believe that sufficient numbers of improved submarines could restore effectiveness. If Germany could deploy 100 Type 21 submarines simultaneously, he argued, they could overwhelm Allied defences through sheer numbers, even if individual boats were less effective than earlier models. This calculation ignored the reality that Allied industrial capacity had rendered such arithmetic irrelevant. American shipyards alone were producing merchant vessels at rates that exceeded all submarine sinking capabilities, regardless of submarine numbers or effectiveness. Britain's shipyards added to this total. Canadian yards contributed additional vessels. The tonnage war that Dönitz had calculated would bring Allied defeat had reversed so completely that Germany could not possibly sink ships faster than they were being built. More fundamentally, the systematic integration of Allied advantages meant that deploying more submarines simply provided more targets for hunter-killer groups that were becoming increasingly efficient. The loss rate for U-boats on their first patrol exceeded 50% by late 1944. Deploying 100 submarines simultaneously would likely result in 50 destroyed before they could achieve significant successes. The final year of the war saw U-boat operations reduced to desperation measures that achieved little strategic effect. Submarines equipped with snorkels could remain submerged for extended periods but operated with severely reduced effectiveness. Their top speed while snorkeling was barely 7 knots. They could not use periscopes effectively while snorkeling due to vibration and spray. Their operational effectiveness declined to a fraction of earlier capabilities. Acoustic torpedoes designed to home on escort vessel propellers achieved modest successes, but Allied countermeasures like the Foxer noise-making device significantly reduced their effectiveness. More critically, firing an acoustic torpedo revealed the submarine's position as clearly as firing a conventional torpedo, bringing immediate counterattack. Type 21 submarines finally entered service in early 1945, but in insufficient numbers and too late to affect the war's outcome. Only 2 boats completed operational patrols before Germany's surrender. Both survived, demonstrating the design's potential, but neither achieved any sinking successes. The contrast between German desperation and Allied confidence could not have been more stark. By early 1945, escort carrier hunter-killer groups operated with such systematic efficiency that they viewed submarine hunting as routine operations rather than desperate struggles. Aircraft from USS Bogue destroyed U-546 inches April 1945 with the same methodical precision that had characterized successful attacks throughout the previous 2 years. U-546 had torpedoed and sunk the destroyer escort USS Frederick C. Davis on April 24, 1945. This represented one of the last successful U-boat attacks in Atlantic waters. The response demonstrated how completely the tactical balance had shifted. 5 destroyer escorts from Bogue's task group immediately converged on the attack position. They established sonar contact within minutes and commenced coordinated depth charge attacks. For over 2 hours, they prosecuted the contact with systematic precision, forcing the submarine deeper and deeper until her pressure hull could no longer withstand the strain. U-546 surfaced with major damage, unable to dive. Her commander, Oberleutnant Sir C. Just, ordered the abandoned ship. Of 60 crew members, 24 survived to be captured. Just was not among them. The entire engagement, from initial torpedo attack to submarine destruction, lasted less than 3 hours. This represented the terminal evolution of hunter-killer operations. What had required days of effort in early 1943 could be accomplished in hours by mid-1945. The learning curve had reached asymptotic perfection. When Germany surrendered 2 weeks later, the 49 U-boats that complied with Dönitz's order to surface and proceed to Allied ports represented the surviving remnant of a force that had once numbered over 400 operational boats. Many of these survivors were Type 21 submarines that had never fired a shot in combat. Others were training boats that had never left German waters. The operational boats that had fought in the Atlantic were nearly all destroyed. The final accounting revealed the magnitude of Allied victory in the underwater war. 784 German U-boats destroyed, 30,000 submariners killed, a casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any military service in any nation during the war. Allied losses, while significant, paled by comparison. Approximately 5,000 naval personnel were killed in anti-submarine operations. 1 escort carrier lost in the Atlantic. Fewer than 20 destroyer escorts sunk. The exchange ratio exceeded 15-1 in favor of Allied forces. More importantly, the strategic objective of protecting Atlantic supply lines had been achieved completely. By war's end, convoys crossed the Atlantic with minimal losses. The invasion of Normandy in June 1944 proceeded without significant U-boat interference. Allied armies in Europe received continuous supply throughout the final year of war. The escort carrier hunter-killer groups had not merely won a naval campaign, they had secured the logistical foundation that made Allied victory possible. In the decades following the war, naval historians and analysts dissected the Battle of the Atlantic to understand the factors that determined its outcome. Their conclusions consistently emphasized the systematic nature of Allied advantages rather than any single decisive factor. Technology mattered, but only when integrated effectively. Radar, sonar, and acoustic torpedoes existed in various forms before their decisive application in 1943. What changed was not the technology itself, but the systematic methods for employing it effectively. Intelligence mattered, but only when acted upon rapidly. Breaking the Enigma code provided crucial insights, but these insights became decisive only when hunter-killer groups could respond to intercepted communications within hours rather than days. Industrial capacity mattered, but only when production was organized efficiently. American shipyards built thousands of vessels, not merely through raw industrial power, but through revolutionary production methods, like prefabrication and assembly line construction. The convergence of these factors in May 1943 created the inflection point that determined the Atlantic campaign's outcome. Before May, U-boats maintained strategic viability despite growing losses. After May, their effectiveness declined irreversibly, regardless of tactical or technological improvements. This pattern of systematic advantages overwhelming individual capabilities would characterize warfare throughout the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. The lessons learned in the Atlantic influenced Cold War naval doctrine, shaped modern anti-submarine warfare, and demonstrated principles that remain relevant to contemporary military operations. The escort carriers that achieved this victory were unglamorous vessels, converted from merchant hulls and derided by some naval officers as makeshift expedients. But these humble ships, operating systematically with supporting destroyer escorts and shore-based intelligence, achieved what the mightiest battleships could not. They transformed the Atlantic from a German lake into an Allied highway. The men who served aboard escort carriers and destroyer escorts in hunter-killer groups understood that their contribution would likely be overshadowed by more dramatic campaigns in the Pacific or the invasion of Europe. They hunted submarines in grey Atlantic waters, enduring monotonous patrols punctuated by brief moments of intense combat. Their victories were measured in sunken submarines rather than captured islands or liberated cities. Yet their achievement was fundamental to Allied victory. Without control of the Atlantic, there could be no invasion of Europe. Without secure supply lines, Britain could not have continued the war. The escort carrier hunter-killer groups provided both, systematically destroying the U-boat threat that Churchill had identified as his greatest fear. In recognition of this contribution, USS Bogue received a Presidential Unit Citation and 3 battle stars. USS Card received similar honors. Other escort carriers and their supporting destroyer escorts received commendations that acknowledged their crucial role, but perhaps the most fitting tribute came from Admiral Dönitz himself in his post-war writings. Reflecting on the defeat of his submarine force, he acknowledged that the Americans had revolutionized naval warfare through systematic application of technological and industrial advantages. "We were fighting in the old way," he wrote, "while they had invented a new way of war." The German U-boat force had entered the conflict as the most advanced submarine force in the world, led by experienced commanders who had spent decades developing tactics and doctrine. They had achieved remarkable successes that brought Allied defeat within reach, but they encountered an enemy that transformed warfare itself during the course of the conflict. The Americans and British did not merely fight more effectively, they fundamentally changed how naval combat was conceived, planned, and executed. They integrated intelligence, operations, and logistics into a comprehensive system that made individual tactical excellence irrelevant. This transformation represented the true shock that German U-boat commanders experienced. They had prepared for tactical combat between skillful opponents. They encountered systematic operations designed to eliminate variables and ensure predetermined outcomes. The Wolfpacks that had terrorized Atlantic convoys found themselves hunted by forces that operated with mechanical precision. Every radio transmission was intercepted, every surfacing was detected, every attack position was predicted. The ocean that had seemed vast enough to hide hundreds of submarines became transparent to forces that could see through water, darkness, and distance. This was the fundamental reality that destroyed the U-boat force. Not lack of courage, not inferior equipment, not even numerical disadvantage, but systematic application of integrated advantages that made submarine operations unsustainable. The escort carrier hunter-killer groups embodied this new form of warfare. They were not merely ships and aircraft, but components of an integrated system that included intelligence gathering, operational analysis, technological development, and industrial production. Each element reinforced the others. Each improvement multiplied overall effectiveness. By war's end, this system operated with such efficiency that submarine hunting had become routine rather than desperate. Patrol patterns were optimized, Attack procedures were standardized. Training prepared crews for every contingency. Results were predictable and consistent. The age of warfare as individual combat between skilled opponents had ended. The era of systematic operations, designed to achieve predetermined outcomes through overwhelming integrated advantages, had begun. The German U-boat commanders who survived to see this transformation understood that they had witnessed something historically significant. They had seen the old way of war defeated by the new. Their experience echoed across subsequent decades as militaries worldwide adapted to the reality that systematic advantages would determine future conflicts. The escort carrier hunter-killer groups of the Battle of the Atlantic stand as monuments to this transformation. They were the first forces to fully demonstrate that modern warfare would be won not through superior courage or tactical skill, but through systematic integration of technology, intelligence, industrial capacity, and operational methodology. Their victory shocked German U-boat commanders because it represented something unprecedented in naval history. A complete and irreversible transformation from tactical combat to systematic operations, from individual excellence to integrated superiority, from the art of war to the science of destruction. This was the lesson the Atlantic taught. This was the shock that reverberated through naval forces worldwide. This was the transformation that defined modern warfare. And at the center of this transformation were the unglamorous escort carriers and their destroyer escorts, operating systematically across grey Atlantic waters, hunting submarines with mechanical precision, and securing the supply lines that made Allied victory possible. They had shocked their enemies. They had revolutionized warfare. They had won the longest battle of World War II through systematic superiority that could not be overcome through courage, skill, or determination alone. The Battle of the Atlantic was over. The escort carriers had won. And naval warfare would never be the same.